wonderful to meet somebody at South by Southwest in the U.S. And she said, "Come do what you did there." So I'm gonna give the talk that I gave there, but I'll probably evolve it a little bit. There are going to be 3 parts to this talk, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers, as Sandra mentioned. The first part is I'm going to tell a little bit of my story. The second part will be some statistics. They're going to be statistics from the United States, but actually they're pretty relevant. I compared them to Brazil, and they're actually very similar. So I'll speak to statistics in the US, but they'll be very comparable here. And thirdly, I will offer some solutions. Now, solutions for what? What is the purpose of this talk? I think that my talk at South by Southwest was called "The Digital Economy is Not Just for the Young." And my whole premise here is the idea of intergenerational collaboration. We have 5 generations in the workplace for the first time. And I can tell you that 7 years ago, this was not on my mind. I wasn't thinking about it. And then I had this experience at Airbnb, which I'll talk about in a moment. But I do think it's a huge opportunity and issue. So we'll talk about that. And then I really welcome you to ask as many questions as you want. And for those who need a translator, we're so lucky that my Portuguese is very bad. I'm just barely learning Spanish. So I mi español es muy malo. I come here and I start speaking Spanish to people who are like, what are you? We don't speak Spanish here. So thank you for being understanding. All right, so we'll start with the story, then we'll do the statistics, then we'll do the solutions. Okay. So it was the 3rd day on the job for me at a hot Silicon Valley startup in early 2013. I was twice the age of everybody in the room. I had been asked to join this company because I was a seasoned expert in my field. But in that room with those dozen engineers, I felt like an imbecile, or very stupid, because I had no idea what they were talking about. I sat in that room with engineers partly because on my 3rd day, I figured if I'm going to be in a tech company for the first time, I better learn technology. So I did my best to be invisible in this room because I just wanted to listen, and I would write down the words that I didn't understand such that I could ask someone later. And then all of a sudden, the wizard, who was 25 years old, who was running the meeting, turned to me and asked, so the wizard asked me, if you shipped a feature and no one used it, did it really ship? Ship a feature? At that moment, excuse my American English here, Chip realized he was in deep shit. You could say, if you're in trouble in America, you say you're in deep shit, excuse me. But I realized I was in deep shit because I had no idea what it meant to ship a feature. So after an awkward silence, he mercifully moved on to someone else. I slid down in my chair and I could not wait for that meeting to end. So that was my introduction to Airbnb, almost 7 years ago. I had been invited by the 3 millennial co-founders of Airbnb to join the company to democratize hospitality. They were a small tech startup, growing quickly, but they had not one person in the company with a hospitality or travel industry background, nor was there anyone in the company who had the background in starting a company and running it. So that was part of my job. And I'd spent from age 26 to 52 as a boutique hotel entrepreneur, starting a company called Joie de Vivre. That's about as much French as I know. And Joie de Vivre means joy of life in French. And it had become the 2nd largest boutique hotel company in the United States. So I knew something about hospitality, but after my first week at Airbnb, I realized that the brave new home sharing world didn't need most of my bricks and mortar old school hotel insights. A stark reality rocked me. What do I have to offer these young people? I was 52 years old and their average age was 26. I had never worked in a tech company before. I had never heard of the phrase, the sharing economy. I did not have an Uber app on my phone. In fact, when Brian Chesky, the co-founder and CEO, who said, Chip, we want you to be the head of global hospitality and strategy, but I also want you to be my in-house mentor, when he tried to convince me to join the company, he said, I'm going to Uber over to your house to talk with you about this. And I said to him, you're going to do what? I did not know what that meant in early 2013. Of course I do now. And I've known it for a long time. But it shows how quickly technology arrives. So I didn't know much. I had a boss, Brian, who I was also supposed to mentor. He was 21 years younger than me. What was it going to feel like to get my first performance review from someone the age of my son? That was going to feel strange. So this was not my natural habitat. And many people at that point might have said, I'm leaving after 1 week. This is not the right place for me because I feel like I will fail here. I'm using all of my old school knowledge, but in this place, maybe it doesn't matter much. But I decided instead of having judgment or fear, I decided to turn the fear into curiosity. And to ask the question, could I match my wise eyes with their fresh eyes? I thought of myself almost like a modern day Margaret Mead, the cultural anthropologist, amongst the millennials. She went to Samoa and Bali and places like that. I was just in, at a tech startup, which was my version of cultural anthropology. And what I started to see is maybe I had as much to offer them as they did to me. The more I thought about it, the more I realized, wow, we as different generations, with 5 generations in the workplace for the first time, we almost operate like separate, isolationist countries on the same continent. We have different dialects, we have different boundaries, we have different cultures, and we actually haven't figured out how to open up the intergenerational pipelines of wisdom across those generational boundaries. And so I believe that the ultimate trade agreement of our times is to figure out how to do that in the workplace. Now, often this trade agreement at Airbnb for me took the form of what I call EQ for DQ. So you're familiar with EQ? Have you ever heard of EQ? Emotional intelligence. So EQ is something that actually grows as you age. Your IQ often does not. So your intelligence may not, your knowledge of things may grow, but your actual intelligence often doesn't grow as you age. But your emotional intelligence does. So EQ grows with age, so the older you are, you may have more EQ. Not always. We know lots of people who are older who don't have it. I won't say names, but I'm from America. But truly, how to create a product. I didn't even know the word product, spoke to the software application. I thought product was Airbnb's homes and apartments. And I came to realize I learned as much from him as he did from me. But what he learned from me was things that he hadn't expected. He said 3 months into me joining Airbnb, Chip, we hired you for your knowledge, but now what we realize we've gotten is your wisdom. And wisdom is an interesting thing. Wisdom is a word that's different than knowledge. I hadn't ever thought of that. Knowledge is basically, first of all, Google. Let's say thank you to Google. Let's give a round of applause to Google. They opened up their campus for us. Thank you to Google. Yes, a little bit more. So Google is the world's expert at knowledge. All of that knowledge is in your pocket, on that phone you have. But that's different than wisdom. Wisdom is using your human-centered pattern recognition to tap into intuition, emotional intelligence, being able to connect with the collective consciousness, creativity. All of these are qualities that actually help a person become more wise. So what I started to realize is that I have wisdom. Now, I had a direct report named Laura. Laura was, when I joined at age 52, she was 27. She'd worked 4 years for Google in Silicon Valley and a year and a half at Airbnb. When I joined, she was very excited that I was going to help her because at age 27, she had 7 direct reports who were reporting to her, average age 24, so she's 27. The average age of her direct report was 24. She had 0 management or leadership training. And that's partly because in Silicon Valley, you grow quickly into leadership positions, and the company doesn't keep up with the learning and development you need. So she saw me as the EQ to her DQ as well. But one of the things that I learned quickly from her was, she said to me, I don't care if you're in the B2B or the B2C or the C2C business, all of organizational work is really H to H, human to human. And understanding how to lead and manage other humans is part of what she wanted. What she said to me, Laura said to me early on was, Chip, most of your fact knowledge isn't very valuable here at Airbnb. What she meant by that was, I knew how many rooms a maid cleans in an 8-hour shift because I'm a hotelier. But in the world of home sharing and Airbnb, that didn't matter a whole lot. But what did matter, according to Laura, what she said to me, is it's not your fact knowledge that matters, it's your process knowledge. You know how to get things done. Understanding the underlying motivations of everybody in the room. And especially organizationally, how to take an idea that we as a team have and then help it sort of take it on its journey through the company to make sure people will support it. Most of the people at Airbnb had 0 background in working in a large organization. So they didn't know the organizational savvy, or you could say the politics of how to get something through. So during my time at Airbnb, I started to realize that a new kind of elder was starting to emerge in the workplace. Now, this is not the elder of the past who was regarded for their reverence. We revered our elders in the past. No, this kind of modern elder was actually not appreciated for their reverence, but they were appreciated for their relevance. And the relevance meant you could take your timeless wisdom and apply it to modern day problems because you as a modern elder are as curious as you are wise. So we think of elders in the past being all about the wisdom, but I think elders today, if they're going to be a modern elder, better be as curious as they are wise, because they better be as much of an intern as they are a mentor. And that's what I was at Airbnb. I had over 100 mentors over my almost 7 years there. But in almost every one of those cases, I learned as much from them as they did from me. So this idea of curiosity and wisdom is interesting. Curiosity tends to open up possibilities, and then wisdom distills down what's truly essential and important. So if you can actually be both of those, be both curious and wise in the same person, wow, you have so much to offer the modern day workplace. So let me move to the next part of my talk. That's sort of a story. I'll come back to that during the Q&A. But let's talk about some statistics that are interesting. Because what I just described there was a successful story of intergenerational collaboration. Unfortunately, that's not normal. There are lots and lots of evidence, there's more and more evidence that, frankly, if you are in an industry where there is more and more desire for digital intelligence, there's a sense that you get obsolescence or irrelevant very young. Let me explain that a little bit further. If we're all going to live maybe 10 years longer, but power in certain industries, especially in technology, is moving 10 years younger, what has happened is we've created a 20-year irrelevancy gap that didn't used to exist. So if you're in midlife And in Silicon Valley, midlife starts at age 23. No, I'm kidding. No, but it really starts around age 35. Around age 35, people in Silicon Valley or in the tech industry can start feeling a little bit like, wow, I'm in midlife. I'm 35 years old. And in the past, midlife was considered to be 45 to 65. Today, I think midlife is 35 to 75, because in a lot of industries, people feel irrelevant younger. And if we're going to live longer, more and more of us are going to actually work and live longer by choice or by necessity. Or we're going to live longer, but we're going to choose to work longer as well. So here's four key statistics that are really quite interesting. Number one is what percentage, and as I said earlier, I will use American stats here, but they're actually relatively comparable to Brazilian stats. What percentage of people actually have a boss that is younger than them today? What do you think? 15? 50, 50, okay, 50? 70%, no, okay, so wow. You guys are impressive. Usually people say 20%, maybe 25%. The statistic today is 40%. So 40% of people have a boss that's younger than them. By the year 2025, 6 years from now, the majority of people in modern countries, and Brazil is a modern country, the majority of people actually will have a boss that's younger than them. We have no history of that at all in the history of organizations. There's not a history of people generally having a boss that's younger than them. So actually, let me get my notes out here because I want to make sure I cover everything. Just a second. So what's interesting about that, in terms of this large percentage of people having a boss that's younger than them, is a lot of this is coming in industries that are very focused on DQ, digital intelligence. The tech industry, the entertainment industry, advertising companies. So what we're seeing is the tech industry has an enormous influence on not just the tech industry, but all industries. Today, 7 of the 10 most valuable companies in the world, including Google, are tech companies. 7 of the 10 most valuable companies in the world today are tech companies. So it's almost like all companies in the world want to be a tech company, because if you actually can package yourself as a company that has a strong DQ, digital intelligence, you are going to actually maybe be more valuable, which is part of the reason why all companies, are more and more focused on hiring what we call digital natives, which is younger people who frankly have a stronger facility or fluency with technology. Now, I am using generalizations here, let's just be really clear. It was baby boomers who actually created the internet. So it's not like older people can't do technology, but I'm using on average here. Okay. What's the average age of an employee at Silicon Valley's tech giants? Like, let's say Google, Facebook, Apple, Amazon. 30, exactly. This woman here who's got a beautiful, she's doing a lot of note taking. I think she's a journalist. It's okay. It's exactly 30. But, if you use the top 5 tech companies, the average age is 30. The average age in the United States for an employee is about 42 to 43. So that's a big difference, 30 versus 42 to 43. Now, at Airbnb, the average age was 26. Now it's 28. I think I have a lot to do with increasing the age average. I am 58 now. I'm soon to be 59 next month. And I still am with Airbnb, so I did 4 years of full-time work, and now for 2.5, almost 3 years, I've been a strategic advisor. But here's an interesting statistic that people don't know about. 75% of millennials, and for those who don't know millennials are generally age 22, 23 to age 38. That's about the range, 39 maybe. 75% of millennials actually would like to have a mentor. Because more and more companies don't have strong learning and development programs. because frankly, people actually stay in companies shorter periods of time. So 75% of millennials would like to have a mentor. What percentage of millennials actually have a mentor? 2%. Wow, that's a big gap. 2% versus 75%. So this is something for us to consider. Deloitte, the large accounting and consulting firm, show the following, that millennials who actually were likely to stay in the company at least 5 years, and as opposed to job hopping, were twice as likely to have a mentor in that company. So mentorship is not just a great thing for educating and for learning and development. It's a beautiful retention tool for companies that want to keep their young people. All right, the third statistic is, what's the fastest growing demographic in the labor force today? Now I'm going to answer this one myself. The natural tendency to say is like the fastest growing, well, it's millennials, or maybe it's Gen Z, which is the people just coming in. And I think on a percentage basis, of course, Gen Z is the fastest growing because it's starting from almost nobody. I mean, they're just going into the workforce today, or those who actually are in their early 20s. But actually, here's the interesting statistic. The fastest growing age demographic in the workforce in the United States today is people 60 and older. Part of this is because the boomer generation is so large, and so those people have moved into the 60 and older group. Partly because, historically, we thought people would retire at age 65. And a huge percentage of people are not going to retire at age 65, and they're working longer. So all of a sudden, there's this group of people in the labor force that weren't expected to be there. Almost half of the growth in the labor force in the US between 2016 and 2026, during that 10 years, will be people 60 and older. So almost half the labor force growth in the next 10 years is happening from people who are basically a year older than me and older. Wow, staggering statistic. All right? And then the final statistic, before I get to some solutions and we open it up, is what percentage of global companies with a diversity and inclusion program? Are you familiar with a diversity and inclusion program? So yes, it's a diversity and inclusion program, basically a program where a company says, we're going to do things to encourage people to join the company who are not part of the dominant demographic. The dominant demographic in the US is often white men, white, straight men. And so how do you actually encourage people who don't fit that demographic? And then how do you, once you get people who are not that demographic in the company, how do you support them in ways that they feel like they've got a voice? Okay, that's D&I, diversity and inclusion. Now, most companies that are global companies have a D&I program. But what percentage of those global companies that have a diversity and inclusion program, which usually is oriented toward people, different race, gender, sexual orientation, etc., what percentage of them have expanded their D&I program to include age as a demographic that's just as important as the other ones for diversity? 2%? 5%? 8%. So the idea of age diversity as something that we need to encourage in the workplace is a very new idea. It's not one that actually has been given a lot of attention by the companies of the world. So, what I'm now going to focus on is some solutions. Because, I'm not here to sort of talk about the fact that, my situation was a good situation. It was. But I was asked by the founders to join a company that was very small, that was about to grow really big. So I had two great things going on. Number one is the founders wanted me, which is not always the case for someone in their 50s. And number two is it was a company that actually turned out to grow really quickly. Now I had something to do with that. I helped to steer the rocket ship, but it was going to do well even without me. Maybe not as well, but it still was going to do well. So that's not always the case. Sometimes you're the person where you feel like you're irrelevant and invisible in your 50s or 60s or 40s even, and you're joining a company that's actually just nuts and doing badly, and you feel like, wow, this is the end of my career, and maybe I'm not going to get paid by these people because the company may go out of business. So what are some solutions? Well, I'm going to suggest 4 solutions here. And the first one is going to be, I think companies need to do a better job of figuring out how to curate more mutual mentorship. So what we know from that Deloitte statistic is millennials want mentors. What we know from my personal experience and talking with hundreds of people in midlife and beyond is that their best mentorship relationships is when they were learning something as well. When it's purely you as the older person teaching someone younger than you, that's a beautiful experience, but it actually gets even more interesting and has more longevity as a relationship when you actually are learning something from that younger person as well. So how do we curate more mutual mentorship in companies? Well, part of the way we do it is we amplify it when we see it. If you're a company of some size and you see a 54-year-old woman actually creating a really interesting mutual mentorship relationship with a 26-year-old woman or a 26-year-old man, you actually, and that's worked well, you figure out how in the internal communications of the company that you help people to see this is possible. Additionally, you look at how do you create opportunities to do what we call speed mentoring. So I've seen companies do this now and it's very interesting. They'll take an afternoon off. They'll say, for anybody who wants to join us, this afternoon we're going to have you sign up in advance and tell us what is it that you would like to learn and what is it that you could teach. And then based upon just some simple technology, they can actually create some almost like 5-minute or 10-minute meetings back to back to back. So let's say theoretically I can teach something about leadership. I want to learn something about Google Docs. Now, truthfully, before I started Airbnb, I didn't know what a Google Doc was. Now they're like, Google Docs are my friends. If Google ever somehow loses their ability to access docs, I've lost my whole life. My life is a Google Doc. So, so what's interesting is if you could actually create that kind of afternoon and then create relationships such that, oh, here's somebody who knows about Google Docs, but they also want to learn about leadership. Oh, I can spend 5 minutes with them, or 10 minutes with them. Let's see in that 10 minutes of coffee or tea whether there's a rapport. If there's a rapport, maybe I can actually just continue. One of the pieces of advice I would just suggest to you, for those of you who are looking for a mentor, is don't go asking the M word to start with. In the US, what people say, be careful about popping the M word. They're talking about marriage there. When it comes to M word in the workplace, I'm talking about mentorship. If you ask someone to be your mentor before you spend a little bit of time with them, that person might say, ooh, that's a little too abrupt, a little too soon. So spend a little bit of time with a person, get to know them, and then actually get clear about how you can make the mutual mentorship relationship work. I can talk more about that. If you want to learn more about that during the Q&A, ask me more questions about what's a beautiful mentorship relationship. Second solution is the following. We need to figure out how to value wisdom and understand where it exists in our organizations. Here's a great question that some companies are starting to ask on their employee satisfaction survey. The question is this: other than your boss, who in the company do you look to for advice or wisdom? Other than your boss, who do you look to in the company for advice or wisdom? So whether you do employee satisfaction surveys every quarter, twice a year, or once a year, or whenever you do them, you incorporate that question into asking your employees about their experience of working in your company. Is what you've done is you've given them the opportunity to say who are the people who've become informal or formal mentors who aren't their boss. And what you as a company get once you actually have that list of everybody is you now know how to create what we would call in the US a heat map of wisdom in your company. A heat map basically means where is something located. So if you know that there are 20 people, let's say there's a company with 1,000 people, and there's 20 people who got called out or got mentioned much more than anybody else in the company, those 20 people, and they may be varying ages, because just because you're, a lot of the wisdom can rest with younger people too, for sure. So once you know where the wisdom resides in your company, then you start asking the question, how do we help that person have a bigger influence in the organization in terms of being able to share their wisdom? Let me use an example. So Google is sort of famous. It's fun to talk about Google when we're here at their offices. They're sort of famous for something they did 10 years ago. They created, actually more than 10 years ago, I think it was maybe 15 years ago at this point. They created something called 20% time. Now, the premise behind 20% time was this. If you are a successful engineer at Google and entrepreneurial in your thinking, we want you to actually think about new products that Google could offer that would be good for the company. And so what you do is you would petition to your boss saying, I would like to actually reduce my scope. In reality, is very little of the time that people reduce their scope. It was like 100% plus 20%, but it was not like 80% plus 20%, but that's the reality of the situation. The original premise was you reduce your scope and you can allocate 20% of your time to whatever project your boss agrees to that you think is an entrepreneur idea for the company, which allows an entrepreneur engineer to go out and try something new. It's an interesting idea. Well, what if companies that knew they had wise people in the organization thought something similar? And they said to maybe there's a 50-year-old in a company full of 30-year-olds who clearly is seen as a wise person in the organization. What if you went to that 50-year-old and said, how about if we give you some formal training in coaching and mentoring? And we'll actually, if you choose to, reduce your scope of work by 50% if you want to do that, such that you can become an in-house coach and mentor in the company. You're also someone who speaks at the new hire orientation when all the new hires come in. You've been in the company for 15 years. You're a culture bearer. You understand the institutional wisdom of the organization. So people see you as, to use a Star Wars character, Yoda. They see you as Yoda. They see you as a person who actually has a lot of wisdom. You may be only a junior manager in the company. You're not a CEO. You're not a senior. You're not on the executive committee. But you're perceived as someone who has a lot of wisdom. Now, a company that's done something like this is Procter Gamble. They had what's called a mastery society for 50 or 60 years. It's for people who've been at Procter Gamble for at least 10 years, and they've proven themselves to be wise, but they're probably not going to be growing a lot in senior levels of the company. But they have a lot of wisdom. Often when someone's growing and they get older and they're not going up the organizational chart anymore, there's a perception that they have no value to the company anymore, which is really unfortunate because often they do have a lot of value. So creating a mastery society allowed Procter & Gamble to keep their strong, good people, even if they weren't going to grow into more senior levels of leadership. The third solution I want to bring up is what's called an ERG, an employee resource group. This is particularly valuable in companies that focus on diversity and inclusion. Employee resource group is also known often as an affinity group. What it means is for a company that has a dominant demographic, there are people who don't necessarily fit that demographic that say, we're going to create a women's group at Google. And a women at Google is a group, or actually let's use the example at Google that I'm even more familiar with, is they're called the Google Grey-goers. Google calls their employees Googlers, but actually for older people they call them Grey-goers because they have gray hair. So the Google Grey-goers is an ERG, an employee resource group of people, I think they use 40, people who are 40 or older, that actually want to be part of an affinity group. So that group can actually meet and talk and get to know each other and sometimes use it as an advocacy group within the company. So how is it an advocacy group? Well, it can actually be used as a way to help recruit people. For women, for people of color, for people with disabilities, for gays and lesbians. Sometimes that employee resource group is the way that they help to actually bring new people into the company. So it helps to bring new recruiting opportunities. At Airbnb, the employee research group is called Wisdom at Airbnb. It's people 40 and older. It's now the 4th largest employee research group of 14 ERGs in the company. And what we used it for was often as a voice of the customer. The fastest growing demographic of Airbnb hosts in the world, age-wise, is people 50 and older. And the highest customer satisfaction demographic of any Airbnb hosts are women 60 and older, because they're mothers and grandmothers and they know how to take care of people when they're traveling. So, interestingly, you have a company full of people in their mid to later 20s running a business, where their fastest growing demographic segment is people twice their age. So often our employee research group of Wisdom at Airbnb was the bridge, because we understood older guests and hosts, being older people ourselves, so that we could translate that to the 26-year-old engineers and product designers, so they understood, gosh, when one of them said, why don't we just take the whole Airbnb platform and only have it on mobile? We won't have it on laptop anymore, we'll just have it on mobile. And I was like, nope. People 40 or 50 and older won't like that. For all kinds of reasons. I much prefer working on my laptop than my mobile, especially for complex tasks. For something that's quick and efficient, sure. But yeah, and Uber is a quick and efficient kind of thing. But so the premise was, well, Uber's only on mobile. Well, yeah, Uber's a completely different business. So that kind of advocacy around whatever your demographic is what an ERG does, and for age is going to be very valuable. On the other hand, if you're in more of a traditional company, more of an old school company, you may need exactly the opposite. You have all kinds of 50-year-olds and all the power rests with the older people. So your ERG that you definitely need is an ERG focused on younger people in the company, because they're the ones that actually don't have the voice. More and more companies are now creating an ERG that's based upon intergenerational. So it's like, it's an intergenerational, it's focused on how do we have more intergenerational collaboration in the workplace. All right, the last solution, and then I have one last thought, and we'll go to Q&A, is this: retirement as well as create a longevity strategy. Now, again, excuse the fact that I'm using an American reference here. 25 years ago in the US, if a big global company had said, we're going to create an Asia strategy so that we can actually, or a Latin America strategy, because there's a lot of growth in those two markets, and 25 years ago, a company would say, of course, we need a strategy for that. No one would look at them and say, well, that's a stupid idea. No, everybody said, of course. Well, you don't already have one? Of course you need that. But today, and first of all, demographics are very predictable. You sort of know things because it's not like all of a sudden, the power changes somewhere else. Demographics are very predictable. So here's the thing. When people in companies now say, we need to create a longevity strategy because our employees and our customers are all getting older, people in the marketing strategy department scratch their head and say, what's that? What's a longevity strategy? But more and more companies need to think that way. There's a great book, beyond my own, I hope you'll buy my book, Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder. But there's another book called The 100-Year Life. It comes from two professors from the London School of Business. And what they were able to show is what does the world look like when the average person lives to age 100? And we're already at that stage. It's now perceived that in certain countries in Europe and in the US, the people being born today, the children being born today, are actually on average going to live to age 100. Wow. How does the world change when the average person is going to live to 100? Well, that kind of thinking is how a lot of companies need to start considering. Whether it's how they have employees staying until age 80, or how they actually address a market of people who are going to live longer and make money longer, and therefore be a big dominant part of the consumer economy. The consumer economy, we see it based upon advertising, most of the advertising in the consumer economy is oriented toward young people. Partly because there's a sense that even though they don't have a lot of money, that if you get them loyal early, you have them for a whole lifetime. But if you realize that, wow, get someone at age 50, you may still have 50 years ahead of that with that person as a consumer of yours, you start thinking a little differently as a company. Last thought, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A. So, how old are you going to live to? What age do you think you'll live to? I'm going to do this exercise first. I'm going to do my story on this in a moment. But who wants to be a guinea pig, or who wants to be the person? Who wants to raise their hand and say what age they think they're going to live to?
95.
95, okay. What's your name again? Fernanda.
Yes.
So Fernanda's going to live till 95. How old are you, Fernanda?
43.
43, okay. So here's the math. So Fernanda is 43, and she's going to live till age 95, let's say. What percentage of Fernanda's adult life is still ahead of her? Let's do the math. Somebody get a calculator out, get your iPhone out, and or your, excuse me, iPhone, I shouldn't be talking about iPhones and Google. Get your Android out. So if you start counting her years at age 18, so I said what percentage of her adult life, because you really had a choice starting around age 18. So at age 43, you have, at 18, you have, let's see, what's that? 25 years behind you, correct? Yes. So 25 years of adulthood behind you. And 43 to 95 is 52 years adult ahead of you. 25 behind, 52 ahead. Fernanda, stand up for a second, Fernanda. Fernanda is not even at the 1/3 point of her adult life. Oh my God! So that means Fernanda can start learning how to surf, she can start learning French, she can start learning all kinds of things, because when you realize that that percentage of your adult life is still ahead of you, you start to imagine things that you would not have tried doing if you thought that you were at the stage that society says you are, which is at age 59 now. I'm 50, we'll call me 58 because 59 is not until next month. But I did an online longevity quiz, and it showed that I was going to live till age 98. Okay, if that's true, and I'm now 58, this is an easy math one. 18 to 58 is 40 years. 58 to 98 is 40 years. I am at halftime of my adult life. For some of you, you're like, oh no, I have that much ahead of me. Well, that may be how you feel about it, but 2 or 3 or 5 years from now, if you shift your mindset, you will start to realize, wow, maybe that's a gift I wasn't expecting to have. During Q&A, I want someone, maybe it'll be good, someone's going to have to ask me the question about the Modern Elder Academy, because this is where we help teach people what to do with those extra years that they have. But I'll come back to that during Q&A, and I'm just going to wrap up and say, thank you, it's great to be here. I'm here for a couple more days. I have 2 speeches tomorrow with SAP, with a competitor here. I'm actually not a competitor exactly, Google and SAP, but all I can say is I love Brazil. When I started my company, I called it Joie de Vivre. I just want to know what is Portuguese for Joie de Vivre, because Brazil has a Joie de Vivre more than the French. You definitely do. So thank you very much.